So in our last session, we saw the primitive methods in software development lifecycle, like the waterfall model, the incremental model, and the iterative model. In today's session, we are going to cover the advanced methods in software development lifecycle. So we have a couple of advanced models which are being used extensively in today's IT projects landscape. Whichever company you say, almost 80 to 90% of the companies, they follow this advanced method. Now, these are the three important methods or framework which are extensively used in today's IT project landscape in any IT industry. The Agile Scrum framework, the Extreme Programming framework, and the DevOps framework. These are the three advanced methods which are being extensively used. So we'll see one by one in this particular session. So we'll first start with Agile Scrum framework. Now, before I begin with Agile Scrum framework, do anyone have any experience working in agile environment? Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Okay. Anyone else has any exposure to agile framework? Okay. No issues. We'll start with the agile methodology. Now we saw in our last session when we covered the primitive framework in waterfall approach or iterative framework or the incremental framework, we saw that there were some customer feedback available to us. There were some customer feedback, not complete customer feedback, when we used to create our artifacts and start analyzing our project. And same thing goes for the other development and QA people as well. But we didn't had a complete control given to the customer wherein they could give us constant feedback. It wasn't constant, it was some feedback. In waterfall model, there wasn't any feedback available at all until the project reached to the maintenance phase. In incremental model, we had some feedback, and same goes to the iterative model. Now the case is different in agile methodology. When it comes to customer collaboration, we have frequent customer communication in this particular framework, the agile framework. Now agile has different flavors associated to it. We have widely used framework called as Scrum, then we have Kanban, then we have XP, then we have DevOps. So essentially they all come under agile umbrella. So if you say that my project is using Kanban, or my project is using XP, or my project is using DevOps, they essentially means the same thing. They are coming from that same parent, that is your agile framework. So why agile framework was created? Why there was a need at the first place? Because there were certain issues that um, uh, became visible of late when we started dealing with the projects, especially the projects which were large scale in nature, wherein the customer feedback, which was a very important aspect, was not at all available, or was available in a limited amount of time or for a limited period of time. And after a specific portion of the software has already been developed, then we started getting those customer feedback. Now, what if a case wherein we are getting parallel customer feedback while we are developing that particular software? So it would definitely meet the expectation of the customer to avoid the last minute surprises that we would be able to mitigate, which was not the case with waterfall approach. So the Agile Manifesto. So for Agile framework, we have something called as Agile Manifesto. Now Agile Manifesto has 4 core values associated to it. Now what are those core values? The first value is called as customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Now what it means is we saw that there are different penalty clauses available in earlier engagement in the primitive methodology. Then there were some rewards. Then there were certain service line agreement or SLAs associated with that particular project. If any of those SLAs or any of those parameters are breached, then the vendor company is to pay a heavy penalty to the customer or the outsourcing company. Now that is one aspect when it comes to the legal issue, dealing with the legal issue of a particular project. But is there a mechanism by which we should be able to reduce this risk? So the obvious approach that come into place is customer collaboration. If we have the customer feedback very frequently, and if we are able to communicate our challenges to the customer, and if the customer is acknowledging our issue, or the customer is providing the feedback after every increment of the software has been delivered to the customer after they test it out, so it would be very beneficial for both the parties that they are on the same page in terms of development and in terms of meeting the business expectation. So what Agile did over here is they put more emphasis on customer collaboration, gaining their constant feedback rather than negotiating the contract, what is mentioned in the contract, like the risk, the rewards, the penalty. They didn't get into that particular part. They focused more on this particular part. The next part is individual interaction over processes and tools. Now, what happened in primitive framework is like we used to use a certain set of processes in place. Processes as in like we saw in waterfall method, wherein we used to follow a process that first we would start with analysis, then design, then your development, then testing, then your deployment, and then your maintenance. So we followed a process, and we also emphasize that if you give the necessary set of requirement, let's say there are 50 features needs to be developed, you have to give all the 50 features information, the details, right during the analysis phase. During development phase, if you want to modify a feature, or if you want to what I would say add a new feature, then you cannot do so. So what it emphasized more on the process part. But in Agile, we tend to mitigate or reduce that process part. We tend to believe in individual interaction, where we interact more, irrespective of whether it's a team or whether it's a customer team or whether it's a business sponsor. We interact more so that we all agree to a particular piece of information. So if the customer wants to modify an requirement, they can do so with the help of individual interaction. If the customer want to add a particular requirement, they can do so with the help of individual interaction. So more emphasis was given on individual interaction rather than following a process or the tools, the software tools which we use. For example, if we write an email communication or an email to someone, then we expect that email to get a response within 1 day of time or max by 2 to 3 days of time in agile approach. But that was not the case with your primitive method. So they used to take around 1 week of time. Even after 1 week, you have to send them n number of reminders to reply, and still they don't reply. But that was not the case with agile approach. In agile, we say skip the emails, set up a call and discuss it out right away. So that helped the team become more what I would say productive. So that is the second principle of your agile manifesto. Then third principle is responding to change over following a plan. Like I said, in waterfall approach, we used to follow a plan that if something new requirement comes in development phase, we will only taking it up after the project has been deployed and the maintenance phase has started. So what we essentially did is we followed a plan, but that is not the case with Agile. We respond to the change instantly. For example, your due date for the first software release is coming Friday, and the customer is asking you today to add a new feature. Now you what essentially be doing in agile environment is you won't say no to that particular customer. You would first assess how feasible is that particular change to accommodate and deliver it in coming Friday. So how do you respond to that particular change? How you would do the feasibility of that new addition to the requirement? By assessing the size and complexity of the requirement. Now, how do you assess the size and complexity of that particular requirement? So essentially in software industry, what we do, we categorize the size of that particular requirement from a size of t-shirt. For example, we would have extra small, we would have small, we would have medium, we would have large, we would have extra large, and then we would have extra large. So anything that is doable in between 2 to 4 hours are considered as extra small change or extra small request coming in for development. Anything that is doable within 1 day is called as small. Anything that is doable within 2 to 3 days is called as medium. And anything that is doable within 1 week is called as large. And Excel is something that would span across 2 to 3 weeks, and XSL is something that would take around 1 to 2 months of development. So this is how we define the timelines around the features, how much time it would take to develop a particular component. And then we have a concept called as story points, wherein we assign the story points. Then we have different techniques to practice in and around it, like we have planning poker and all those stuff that we would see when we start digging more in Agile. Now this is about responding to change. So let's say the customer is asking you for a new requirement to be deployed or to be delivered in coming Friday. Then what you would do, you would assess the size of that particular request, whether it's small, medium, extra large, and so on. So if it is feasible for you to accommodate that particular request in this particular release, then you would go about including it. And if it is not feasible, you can discuss it with the customer with the help of customer collaboration and individual interaction, and update them accordingly that this is not doable in this particular release, but definitely we can do it in the upcoming release. So that is what the third principle of Agile Manifesto talks about. Next is the final principle is your working software of Agile Manifesto. Now, Agile Manifesto put more emphasis on working software rather than full documentation. Like we saw in our waterfall approach, that we had a formal documentation in place and it was very detailed in nature. Everything was mentioned upfront, clearly, concisely, everything. But when it comes to Agile, we tend to eliminate that much detailing in particular documentation. We work in absolute no documentation or very minimal documentation in Agile. But what we put our focus more on is working software. Whatever you are developing basis on the customer feedback, individual interaction, responding to change, whether it's adding any value to the customer. Now, what is this particular term value means? Value is a very vague term and it is different for different people. Everyone perceives the term value as different. For example, if you consider LinkedIn as a company, so the value to them is not quantification. The value to them is more of building a community of professionals. Now, if you consider a company like Amazon, so the value to them is more of a sales. It is more quantitative in nature, and they would focus more on pitching sales, increasing their revenues, become global leader, and so on. Building a community is not a value according to them. So depending on the company, the business the company does, or the nature of the establishment, the value changes. But we as a team need to constantly collaborate towards the value of that particular organization. If it's an insurance company, we need to ensure that whatever we are developing, it should add some value to their insurance business. If we work for a particular bank, then we would ensure as a business analyst whatever reporting activities we do or whatever software development activity we do as a team adds and contributes some value to their business and their company or the domain as a whole. So that is how you define the term value. And remember, value would not be same for every company. Every company would be having a different value associated to them. Okay, so this is the four major components when it comes to your Agile Manifesto, and all your Agile framework are associated with these four what I would say values of Agile Manifesto. Any questions, anyone? Okay. So like I said you, Agile is a combination of your incremental and iterative framework. In my last session, I have already explained you Agile is a combination of the increment nature of the incremental framework and the iterative nature of the iterative framework. So increment is like you divide your team into different increments, and iterative is you deliver the software in different sprint cycles. So sprint cycles give this iterative value to the agile model, and grouping of teams gives the increment value to your agile framework, and together they make the agile methodology. Now there are certain principles when it comes to agile. So those were the four core values of the agile manifesto. Then we have certain principles. So these are the 12 principles basis on which your agile framework is set. The first principle is constantly delight your customer. Like I said, the value would be different for every customer, every business. So you need to understand whatever you are building in your particular software, or whatever working copy of software you deliver to your customer, that adds some value. And when you add value to their business, to their company, that ultimately delights your customer. So that is your first principle. Now, second principle is seek continuous discovery and respond to evolving customer needs. Like I said, a customer can come to you even one day before the deployment or before the final release of software product. So you cannot say no to the customer. Instead, what you would do, you would see whether it is accommodatable or not in that particular release of the particular software. So this way, what you are doing, you are responding to the evolving customer needs. Secondly, the third principle talks about deliver meaningful outcomes frequently. Now, what is meaningful outcomes frequently? So, the meaningful outcome frequently means whatever release you are giving to the customer, let's say within a span of 1 month or within a span of 2 weeks. So, what happens in Agile is we typically have a time box set for us. After every 15 days or every 1 month, we give a release to the customer. Release as in an incremental product shipment to the customer, which is a working software copy. So the third principle talks about we need to deliver meaningful outcomes frequently. Meaningful outcomes as in it should add some business value. Whatever increment you are adding to that particular software, it should add some outcome to the business. For example, if let's say you are developing a particular feature like creating a user registration page. Now you have created, let's say in sprint 1, you created the user registration page. Now the second increment of that particular version of that particular product would be user registration via Facebook. The third increment could be user registration via Google. The fourth increment could be user registration via LinkedIn. Fifth increment could be user registration via Twitter. So essentially what you are doing, you are adding more and more features to that particular system. And essentially what you are doing, you are adding meaningful outcomes frequently. That is, in the first iteration or in the first release, you gave them the registration via an email address or cell phone number. In the second iteration, you went a step ahead and you integrated a Facebook API and gave them a registration via Facebook. In the third iteration, you integrated it with Google API and gave them a registration option via Google. So essentially, you gave them meaningful outcome frequently. Frequently as in release after release. Now this release cycle can be of 2 to 4 weeks. It could be 2 weeks, it could be 3 weeks, it could be 4 weeks, depending on your project. So beyond 4 weeks, it's not an ideal period of time. If you are taking or building a plan wherein you would be having a release after 6 weeks, that means you are not following Agile. Agile says the ideal size of a particular release should be between 2 to 4 weeks. That is either 2, 3, or 4. So mostly industry in particular software industry, depending on the size and complexity of the project, they typically select between 3 to 4 weeks. 2 weeks, I don't think anyone would select until and unless it's a maintenance and support project. So ideal time period is 3 to 4 weeks. Then the fourth principle talks about the primary measure of progress is outcome for our customer. Like I said, if the customer, you are responding to the customer's change and you are giving them meaningful outcome frequently, so that is your primary measure of progress around what your customer perceives a value to your software product. If your customer feels that okay, you are adding some value, giving them some new feature after every release, so that is our primary measure of progress. The fifth principle talks about maintain a constant pace and rhythm indefinitely. Now, what does it mean, maintain a constant pace and rhythm indefinitely? Now, let's say we are having a 1 year software contract, and in that 1 year, you have decided that you would follow a 4 week sprint cycle or 4 week release cycle. So ultimately, you would be giving your customer 12 release in that particular uh, year. So in January, you gave them 10 feature. In February, you gave them 10 feature. In March, you gave them 8 feature. In April, you gave them 5 feature. In May, you gave them 2 feature. So what happened here is the pace or the rhythm of your delivering a particular feature is decreasing. So you have to avoid that. You don't have to increase it constantly, neither you have to decrease it constantly. You have to maintain a pace. For example, in January you gave 10 feature. In February, it may be a case you give 9 feature. In March, you can give 10 feature. In April, you can give 11 feature. So plus minus 1 or 2 is considerable, but not a huge deviation. And even if there is a deviation, it shouldn't be in a constant decreasing side or shouldn't be in a constant increasing side. So that pace and rhythm you need to maintain when you are working in an agile environment. Then comes the sixth principle, that is give continuous attention to excellence. Now we all know agile, the word itself talks about speed or fast. So that doesn't mean that we avoid the necessary due diligence in terms of development, in terms of gathering the requirement, or in terms of analysis. Now, how do we maintain a continuous attention to excellence? So, if you are working as a business analyst in an agile environment, we agree to the fact that agile never, what I say, never gives more emphasis on well-documented system. But that doesn't mean that you won't do any documentation. You would do the documentation, but very minimal in nature, and those documents have to be up to mark, clear, and concise. So we would be learning what are the different techniques and how we should go about creating documentation in Agile in a subsequent session. But you have to maintain that excellence in terms of analyzing the particular requirement. We can conduct multiple techniques like root cause analysis or impact analysis or feasibility study or research to support this excellence as a business analyst. When it comes to development team, now we understand that the deliverables are very frequent in nature. We have to deliver a working piece of software after every 1 month. But that doesn't mean we would code the system like anything. We, avoid the necessary checkpoints. We avoid the necessary architectural the consideration. We avoid the necessary security protocols, or we avoid the necessary security framework. No, the code quality have to be of highest standard. So we need to give continuous attention to excellence. So speed, okay, it is agile, but that doesn't mean we would compromise on our quality. We have to maintain our quality as well. So that is the sixth principle. Now coming to the seventh pointer, it talks about business and technology people work together as one team. Now in agile, we do not have that phase in place. Phase as in first there would be analysis phase wherein all business analysts would be working. Then design phase wherein all the BAs would be working. Then development phase wherein all developers would be working. QA phase wherein all QA people would be working. Now because in agile every team works simultaneously, so we tend to overlap each other in terms of having a common understanding in and around a particular system. So whatever a BA is doing, the developer and QA is aware of. Whatever the developer is doing, the BA and QA is aware of. whatever QA is doing, the developer and the business analyst is aware of. So we know each other's work and what are their particular deliverables. The other principle talks about build products around motivated, responsible adults and give them the freedom to learn and succeed. Now, what does this particular pointer mean? Now, when we work in a particular agile environment, we tend to break the system into different features or a certain set of features. Now, what essentially happens in particular team is like when we break a particular system into a list of features, some features are very critical and some features are very simple. So what essentially team does is they tend to pick up the simple features first and the complex feature later. But you have to ensure that everyone gets an equal opportunity and have the right balance of feature under their accountability. So as a business analyst, you may say that, okay, this feature is simple, I would be doing it. And rest all complex feature, you would be giving it to a senior business analyst. No, that is not the right way of following agile framework. You have to have a right balance between the what I would say, picking up the features between the complexity. You should also pick some complex feature and allow your senior business analyst to pick up some simple features. Later on, we have different options in agile wherein we interact with each other. Then we have a discussion with each other and get things sorted out. But you as a responsible person in a particular agile team have to pick things responsibly. Now, how do we ensure that um, the person is responsibly picking the simple features and the complex feature? Now, how do we ensure that the person is responsible and he won't ditch us or he won't do that what I would say, the picking game in that particular agile team? So we need to motivate the people. Motivate as in we need to convince the people that go for the particular feature. If you face any challenges or roadblocks, we as a team would help you overcome through that particular challenge. You have to give them that particular confidence, because in a particular team there are multiple people with different thoughts, different mindset. Everyone wants to go home early by finishing the simple one first. Then who would do the complex one? Someday at some point of time, the complex things needs to be taken into consideration. They needs to be picked up. So motivate the people in such a way that they pick the feature and ensure that everyone is given a fair chance of evaluation to showcase their expertise in that particular project. So this way you have to motivate it and make them responsible to pick the features as per their convenience. Now, convenience is the secondary part. First, you have to motivate them and make them responsible to ensure that everyone has a right balance of encashing that particular opportunity. Next principle talks about communicate directly and honestly and preferably face to face. Now, whatever challenges you have, whatever roadblocks you have to communicate it upfront and honestly to your team members. No matter a feature was supposed to be developed in a week's time and it is taking you 2 weeks of time, or a feature is supposed to be analyzed within 1 week of time and it is taking you 2 weeks of time. You have to give the necessary supporting justification and you have to communicate it upfront, directly and honestly to your team members. Next principle talks about simplify, maximize the amount of work not done. Like I said, in these two principles, there could be a situation wherein you won't be able to complete your work, or there could be an what I would say, a situation wherein the things are very difficult in nature. So what you would do there, you would adopt the what I would say, mechanism of simplifying the things. No matter the work is not done at that point of time, that doesn't mean that you would put it in the particular what I would say, to do item for a very long period of time. You can put that item in parallel. You can start gathering information, that particular feature in parallel with the other items which you feel you can do. So in that way, in one side, you are picking requirements, you are collecting requirements for that pending item, and at the same time, your delivery speed is also maintained by gathering requirements for the other item. So the both things can be taken in one point of time. So it doesn't mean that if this is not doable, you would always put it aside. No, as and when you get requirement, keep that item updating, that okay, we found two requirements around this particular item, and it would take some more amount of time, but you have to communicate it directly and upfront to your team members. Then comes work in self-organizing and cross-functional team. Now agile never says that all the team has to be in same location. It can be geographically distributed, so the team has to be self-organizing. Now when we work in a geographically distributed environment, so we have 10 people in US, 10 people in UK, 10 people in India, everyone's time zone is different, but that doesn't mean that once the status comes from UK to India and India to US, only then people should start working on. No, there are other pending items as well. You can self-organize yourself and start working on those particular items until the status of the day comes from one particular team, from one geographical location to another team. So you can self-organize yourself. So remember, Agile mostly talks about utilizing your time in efficient way, not to wait for someone. You have to self-organize, self-motivated, self-responsible to achieve your targets and delight your customers. Now the final principle talks about creating a learning culture, share information transparently, inspect and tune behavior. Like I said, when you are working in a particular team, whatever challenges you face, whatever roadblock you face, you have to communicate it to your team upfront and accurately. So that would create a learning culture for other team members. We have seen people, for people who have already experienced the corporate culture, we have seen people that they are excelling in that particular area, especially few members in a particular team. They are excellent in that particular area. But when you reach out to them to ask for a particular piece of information, they are reluctant to pass on that information. So what they are essentially doing, they are not sharing the information transparently with you. So you have to avoid it. So what happens at a later point of time is like a dependency is created on that particular individual, and that particular individual, he excels, but the rest of team, they are still struggling. So the knowledge gap increases in that particular team. So in Agile, it is a special emphasis is given on information sharing or information transparency, wherein everyone should have the same level of knowledge in terms of what is our product goal, what is our business value, how we should respond to a particular um, uh, change coming from a particular customer, how we should self-organize, how we should be self-motivated or self-responsible. You pick any member of team in that particular agile team, everyone should speak the same thing. There shouldn't be any deviation in terms of knowledge and in terms of knowledge gaps. So if you ask a particular feature to a particular team member A, and you ask the same feature to a particular team member B, and you ask about the same feature to a particular team member C. So whatever information they give you, A, B, and C, they should be in sync. There shouldn't be any deviation between those information. So in other words, your team is self-organized, they are transparent, they are motivated, and they are responsible. And this particular thing doesn't exist. That is not sharing the information with the other team members. So these are the 12 agile principles that you need to follow when you are working in an agile culture, irrespective of whatever framework it is, Scrum, DevOps, or Kanban. Any questions, anyone? Yeah. Yeah, please go on with your question.
Uh, Sunil, looking at the 10th principle, it says simplify, maximize the amount of work not done. What do you mean by maximize in this?
Okay, so maximize is like what happens in agile culture is there are some items wherein we don't have the requirement upfront. Okay, so agile says that whenever we have the complete and concrete understanding of that particular item, then only you pick up that particular item. Now, this thing would only happen when we progress through that particular project. Progress through particular project means when we have completed 3 to 4 iteration of that particular software cycles of that particular product which we are developing. Now here maximize the amount of work not done is like, let's say in sprint 1 you saw that particular requirement and you say that okay, we would start some work in and around that particular requirement, but we don't have the complete requirement. So the amount of requirement which is not done in that particular feature is let's say 70%. Now in the next sprint, you pick up that same functionality and you see that, okay, we found some requirement and still the requirement is not complete. So still it is not done. It is not yet complete. So let's say you completed out of, I mean, instead of 70%, it reduced to 60%. Then in the subsequent sprint, it reduced to 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. So this is a case of one particular requirement. There would be multiple requirements in similar fashion, multiple feature in similar fashion. So this particular pointer talks about that you need to maximize the amount of work not done. That means until and unless the final requirements are not in place, until and unless your customer is not convinced, you would keep it as not done, not mark it as done. Because what developer team perceives that whatever information we have in and around particular feature, that is the final, and they would mark it as done. But that is not the right thing. It is still undone at this point of time until and unless customer feels that that particular requirement is done. So maximum amount of work not done has nothing to do with the quantitative aspect of the particular sprint cycle, but it has a relation to the value what you are delivering to the customer, not the quantification.
Okay, got it.
Okay, so these are some of the frameworks which are part of your agile umbrella: Scrum, dynamic system development method, feature driven development, rational unified process, your extreme programming, your large scale enterprise Scrum, your scaled agile framework, Kanban, Lean, disciplined agile, extended agile. They are all flavors of agile umbrella. Now this is your agile Scrum life cycle. Now out of these framework, we are starting with agile Scrum life cycle. Now in Scrum life cycle, we essentially have 4 phases. First is your planning phase, followed by your staging phase, then your development phase, eventually by your release phase. In planning phase, what we do, we set out the vision of that particular product, like what this product is supposed to do. For example, if we are launching a new mobile application or new mobile app in a market, what is the vision of your mobile app? Like it would be a social networking site, or it would be an online dating site, or it would be a fund management particular app for your end customer. So that would be your vision. Then comes your expectation. What are you expecting out of that particular app which you would be launching? So there are certain expectations. For example, if you are launching a social networking site, so ultimately your expectation is to gain more and more number of users after every quarter. Then your expectation could be the user should be engaging. It shouldn't be like that the user has registered it and they have left that application after a particular point of time. No, the user has to be engaging in nature. If you consider Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, people never leave that particular social media platform unless if you consider a selective set of people in a particular community, the users are engaging in nature. They use almost that particular app every day. So that shouldn't happen if you consider the expectation of a social media application. Now, if you consider an expectation out of a fund management application for a banking system, then you should see that it should properly report the fund related to the stock exchange in a real-time scenario. A real-time scenario as in every fluctuation should constantly reflect in that particular application. Any market deviation, if the market is going up, if the market is coming down, then that particular fund evaluation should be constantly changing as per the stock exchange results. That is one expectation. Second expectation is that it should show to its users that how much they are in profit, how much they are in loss. Third expectation could be it should show them particular suggestion that which are the hot selling fund for today, or which are the top funds for this particular week, or which are the highest gainer, highest loser for a particular month. So those kind of statistics it could show in the expectation. Now we saw vision, we saw expectation. Now what is funding then? Now funding is like whenever a new product is being launched into a market, we need to first secure some funders. So funders are essentially your business sponsors who would essentially invest in your particular idea or in your particular vision. They would examine the expectation of that particular app, and they would see your vision, they would see your product roadmap, and then they would give you the funding. Funding as in they won't give the funding upfront. They would do the funding in series, in particular installment. So usually what happens in a product development industry, they give a fund for a period of 2 years. After 2 years, they do a evaluation whether whatever vision was there for that particular product and whatever expectation was set out for that particular product, are they meeting the current market situation or not. Then only they would release the next series of funding. So this is how your funding works. Now what would eventually happen if the product doesn't meet the expectation? So the product is dead in that case. No more funding would be provided by the particular funder for that particular product. Now there may be a case wherein a particular product may be supported by multiple funders, which happens in today's startup market, wherein we have multiple funders funding a particular product. If you consider SoftBank, or if you consider your what I would say Amazon or Microsoft, they have some funding in a particular product, typically in startup, depending on their area of interest or depending on the visions and expectation of that particular uh, product. So this is how your planning works. So planning is not only about by um, creating the ideas and the concepts for a particular product or setting out the expectation. You need to also consider the funding part for that particular product. Now once this planning is done, you go to the staging part, wherein you identify the requirement and prioritize the iteration. So iteration prioritization, like we saw, we use a technique called as ranking, which we saw in our last session. And we also use a technique for deciding the time box for that particular requirement or feature, like the size of the t-shirt, which I already explained to you. So that is where you do during the staging phase, wherein you identify the requirement, you document the requirement in terms of user stories in the context of Agile, and you prioritize those iteration depending on their complexity and size of the requirement. Excuse me. Then comes your development phase, wherein you implement the system ready for the release in each sprint. So this release cycle are called as sprints in Agile. Like I said, this release cycle could be of 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and 4 weeks as per your Agile body. But usually company prefer 3 weeks and 4 weeks of time for a particular release or sprint. If someone says you release of a particular or I would say release of a particular product increment, so they essentially means the sprint cycle. Then comes your release, wherein you deploy your coded piece of software to a particular environment, like your UAT environment or QA environment or the prod environment. So that particular term is called as deployment, wherein you actually deploy or actually promote your code to that particular requirement. So first you would plan, then you would stage, then you would develop, and then you would release. And this cycle goes on continuously till what point of time? Till the product is, um, uh, I mean, this is an ongoing process, but the moment when you feel that the product is no longer adding the value, you essentially stop that particular product. So this cycle would continue till that point of time wherein your product is stopped completely. Else you would keep on adding feature after feature by following this particular cycle. Plan, stage, development, release, give a deployment after 3 to 4 weeks, then again plan, stage, develop, release, give the deployment for the second release, then third release, fourth release, and so on. Now in this planning part, funding is something that is done on a yearly basis. Rest, vision and expectation keeps on evolving constantly after release after release. Okay, before that, any questions, anyone?
Sunil, in the development phase, when you're talking about sprint,
Mhm.
so sprints are basically release cycles, right? Which last, with the duration of which is usually 3 to 4 years under the agile framework. So, like, what is the difference between the different, the completely separate release phase and these sprint cycles? So, are we just every 3 to 4 weeks are we moving into the release phase and going back to development phase, or how is it different?
I'll come to that point in a while. Just park
Okay.
your question. Any other questions apart from that? Okay. Now we will see how your Scrum team looks like. Okay. So essentially in Scrum, we have these three roles. First is your product owner, then is your Scrum master, and then there is your Scrum team. Now, product owner is something, he is the person who is the owner of your particular product features. Whatever the features the product would have, he is the owner of that particular product. Now, Scrum Master is something who is a collaborative force between your product owner, your Scrum team, or any XYZ stakeholder he has to interact with. So, he is kind of facilitator. Product owner gives direction to the team, Scrum Master facilitates the conversation, and Scrum team is the team who actually analyzes and builds the particular product. Now, this particular Scrum team can have a business analyst, can have your quality analyst, can have your developer, or they can have all three of them. Now, essentially, when we talk about Scrum, these are the three important roles they that exist in a typical Scrum environment. Now, where is the project manager and business analyst in this particular context? In one business case, we can include a business analyst under a Scrum team. But what if we tweak that particular case and we seek a explicit role of business analyst in this particular environment? So essentially, your business analysts are somewhere related to your product owner. He owns the requirement. He gives the necessary direction on what feature to pick next or what all items to package in a particular release. So your BA role is more relevant to your product owner role. Now, when it comes to management, all the status tracking or all the team's progress is something being done by the Scrum Master. So Scrum Master can be related to a role of a project manager. In if you consider it with, compare it with the primitive frameworks where we have the defined roles like BAs and your uh, project managers. And then we have the Scrum team. We won't name it as developer team or QA team. We would simply call them as Scrum team. So these are the three essential roles which exist in your agile Scrum environment. Any project you say, you would find these three roles. No any additional roles. Now, this is the case at the project level. What if we move or if we extend our thinking to a level beyond projects? For example, if we consider a program, or if we consider a portfolio. So the things are a bit different over there. So I have a dedicated session for it, wherein we would be understanding safe agile, that is scaled agile framework. So essentially in that particular context, we move out of the project environment and think agile from an enterprise context, wherein you would have roles like product manager or product owner or release train engineer and so on. So that is something we would see in our subsequent session. So as of now, any agile project would be having these three roles. Now coming to the Scrum process. So how the process works in Scrum. So in Scrum, we would essentially be starting with a product backlog. Now what is backlog? The backlog is a repository wherein we would having all the items documented, all the uh, features that needs to be incorporated in a particular software, that would essentially be in a product backlog. Now the product backlog, the features are essentially called as stories, or a requirement is essentially called as stories. So it can have n number of stories in your product backlog. And as we progress through the sprint cycles, the release cycle, this product backlogs keeps on incrementing. It never gets reduced. Every sprint cycle, it keeps on increasing because there are always new items added to the product backlog. Now, next comes your sprint backlog. Now, when you start with your sprint, let's say 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 4 weeks. So what you do a planning of the sprint and create a sprint backlog. So sprint backlog is always a subset of your product backlog, wherein we pick up some of the stories. Let's say there are 50 stories in product backlog, and we pick 3 stories out of it to be delivered in 2 weeks. So what we are essentially doing is creating a sprint backlog. Okay. After that, 2 weeks of time, and after doing all the necessary stuff, towards the end, we would be delivering a final shippable product increment. Now, before that, there is one more process called as daily scrum. Now, what is daily scrum? Daily scrum is like before starting your day, all the roles of your agile scrum, the product owner, the scrum master, the scrum team, they sit in a meeting room and they discuss about what went well yesterday, what was done yesterday, what you are going to do today, and what is the next plan. These are the three important things they discuss in your daily scrum meeting, and it happens every 24 hours or once in every day, essentially before starting your day, throughout this sprint cycle, wherein you discuss all your challenges, you discuss all your progresses, and discuss your next course of action in this particular daily scrum meeting. So this is how your agile scrum process works. Now we will see each of these ceremonies one after another. Now this all process are called as ceremonies in agile. So we essentially have 4 ceremonies in agile. The daily scrum or a daily stand-up is called, that is called as ceremonies in agile. Or the sprint planning is also called as ceremony in agile. Or sprint review is also called as ceremony in agile. And sprint retrospective is also called as ceremony in agile. Now, before deep diving into the ceremonies part, I would tell you when this ceremony would actually happen. Now, you have the necessary product backlog in place, then you have to create a sprint backlog. So before that, before creating a sprint backlog, a sprint planning ceremony would happen, wherein you would plan your sprint, and then you would pick all the items that you want in that particular sprint backlog from your product backlog. After that, every day you would be doing your daily stand-up ceremony. Every day, that is every 24 hours before starting your day. After that, the 2-week sprint cycle is over. The sprint demo ceremony would happen, or in other words, it's also called a sprint review ceremony, wherein you would give a demo of whatever you have completed so far to the customer. And after that, you would be having a sprint retrospective ceremony at the end. So in sprint retrospective ceremony, you would discuss out what went well, what the team did well, what the team achieved, what could be improved, and what are the challenges. So it's a retrospective of whatever work you have done so far. Now it is not just retrospective. You have to incorporate the lessons learned out of this particular sprint cycle in your upcoming sprint cycle. So let's say you learned a lesson that the sprint was not completely delivered. So what you would do in the next sprint cycle, you would pick only those items which are doable, and you would try to avoid undone item in the later phases. So this is just an example of lessons learned. There could be n number of lessons learned. For example, from a programming context, you may learn a lesson that this particular coding standard was not as per the market, as per the industry standard. So we need to incorporate a proper coding standard. So that could be a lesson learned. For a business analyst, the lesson learned could be there were some missing requirements in the particular story. So we would start incorporating those lessons learned subsequently in a further session. So that could be a lessons learned for a business analyst. Similarly, for QA people, there could be any lessons learned. So whatever lessons you learn during your sprint retrospective, it has to be mandatorily improvised in the upcoming sprint cycles. So these are essentially the four meetings that happens in four ceremonies that happens in a Scrum environment: daily Scrum meeting, sprint planning meeting, sprint review meeting, and sprint retrospective meeting. If you consider daily stand-up meeting, so essentially it's a time box meeting wherein 15 minutes is the maximum time you should devote to this daily stand-up meeting, not more than 15 minutes. It has to happen on the same place, same time, facilitated by the Scrum Master. All the team members should be present, and you should focus on three questions. That is, what I did yesterday, what I will do today, and what's in my way. These are the three questions that you need to ask. So these are the ground rules for your daily stand-up meeting ceremony. If you consider the other ceremony, sprint planning meeting, we have a product backlog. You would plan out a sprint planning meeting, and you would pick some sprint items or the tasks to do out of that particular product backlog. So sprint planning meeting would essentially talk about what item you need to pick up to be delivered in that particular release. So this is your sprint planning ceremony. Then comes your sprint reviews meeting or the sprint demo meeting, wherein whatever you have developed so far in that particular release, you would give a demo to the customer, wherein the Scrum Master would be present, the product owner would be present, and your stakeholders, sponsors, or the customers would be present, and they would give their feedback like, okay, this is not the way it should be, or you can improve this particular functionality, this is not meeting our expectation. So you would get a live feedback from the customer when you give a demonstration of the system what you have built so far. So this is the third ceremony. Then comes your fourth ceremony, wherein you would use all these tools that are available to you, like flip chart, whiteboard, markers, sticky notes, and all. Entire team would be present, and they would focus on the lessons learned, what the team should stop doing, what the team did well, and what could be improved. So this is your fourth ceremony. Now, what's the difference between sprint review meeting and sprint retrospective meeting? So if you consider the sprint review meeting, all the team members are present, your development team, Scrum Master, and product owner. Here also all the team members are present. Here, end of the sprint or a milestone is discussed. Here, end of the sprint is discussed in your sprint retrospective. Here the duration is of 30 minutes to 60 minutes. Here the duration is of 60 minutes. Now what's the difference between this particular meeting and this particular meeting? So the core difference between this particular meeting is like, here you directly interact with the customer. In this sprint review meeting, you directly get the live feedback from the customer that this particular functionality is working as expected, or this particular functionality needs improvement, or we need to regather the requirement for this particular feature or item. But in sprint retrospective, the customer is absent. He is not part of that particular meeting. He is already given his feedback in sprint review meeting, And we are essentially discussing the feedback that has been provided in sprint review meeting during our sprint retrospective, and we are assessing what went well, what are the lessons learned, and what we could improve in a subsequent meeting. So that's the uh, one or two difference between these two. And the third could be, here you are giving a demonstration of the product, here you are simply discussing about the feedback that has been received during the demonstration of this particular product. Now coming to your question, someone asked me a question. I don't know who was the participant. So this is your answer. So essentially, we have three backlogs in HR. First is your product backlog, then comes your release backlog, and then comes your sprint backlog. Now, product backlog is your master backlog, wherein all the items would be there. Release backlog would essentially consist of 2 to 3 sprints, 2 to 3 sprint cycle, and sprint backlog would essentially be of 2 to 4 weeks only. For example, let me open an Excel sheet. So let's say this is our product backlog. Everyone can see this Excel sheet, right? Hello, everyone can see this Excel sheet, right?
Yes. Yes.
So in our product backlog, we have, let's say, 18 items, 18 features to be delivered. Now, in that particular product backlog, we would first create our sprint backlog. Let's say I create sprint backlog 1. Then I would create sprint backlog 2. Then I would create sprint backlog 3 and sprint backlog 4. Now, let's say out of these 18 features, we deliver 4 feature in sprint 1, deliver the next 4 feature in sprint 2, we deliver the next 4 feature in sprint 3, and then we deliver the next 4 feature in sprint 4. And then there are 2 features which are not yet touched. So they are still in that particular backlog. Now release backlog is like, it would span 2 or more sprints. So when you are saying that you are giving a release to a customer, you are essentially combining 2 or more sprints. So this could be your release backlog 1. Sprint 1 and sprint 2 would be considered as release backlog 1. Then sprint 2 and sprint 4 could be your release backlog number 2. So release backlog essentially combines 2 or more sprint cycle. It is not just one particular sprint cycle. There would be 2 or more sprint cycle in release backlog. Now, there are a couple of questions that may be coming into your mind. For example, if you are unable to complete this feature 4, then where it should go? So it essentially comes back to this particular product backlog. If you are unable to complete feature 6, then it would again come back to your product backlog, and during the next sprint planning session it would be picked up for development depending on the bandwidth of the team and your decision of your stakeholder. Now, sorry. Now next question that may be coming into your minds is like, are these time frames constant? Like I said, a sprint backlog can be between 2 to 4 weeks. Is this time constant? I mean, are we supposed to modify this particular time frame? So the answer to that is no. Once the sprint time is decided, whether it's 2 weeks, whether it's 3 weeks, or whether it's 4 weeks, till the end of the product or till the product development is going on, we are not supposed to change that cycle time frame. It once we decide that sprint would be of 2 weeks, then all the sprints would be of 2 weeks. Once we decide the sprint is of 3 weeks, then all the subsequent sprint cycle would be of 3 weeks. There is no modification to the sprint time box. Now, the next question that may come to you is, what if the requirement or the request from the customer is more in a particular sprint cycle? Let's say in sprint 3 or in during the sprint 3, the customer says that I want, instead of 4 features, I want 8 features to be developed. So your sprint cycle is decided 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks. You cannot break that. Then how do you mitigate it? So what you would essentially do is you would increase the number of resources, number of developers working in that particular sprint. So that flexibility we have, we can increase the number of developers or decrease the number of developers. But the thumb rule is that we cannot break the sprint time box when once decided 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 4 weeks. Now, what about the release backlog then? Can we break the time box of release backlog? Like here it is consisting of 2 sprint backlog. Here also it is consisting of 2 sprint backlog. Can we make it to 3 sprint backlog? Yes or no for a particular release? Or it should be fixed like sprint backlog, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 4 weeks? I'm only talking about the time box part.
I think it'll to be fixed because when sprint backlogs are being fixed, then I think release backlog will also be fixed as per the timeline.
Okay.
Not sure.
So essentially, the plan always suggests that you should be having a fixed release backlog, but then there are certain delays in terms of developing a particular feature. So there may be a case that there may be an additional release or there may be a delayed release. During those circumstances, we alter with the release backlog. Not in every case, but for sprint backlog, in every case, we have to stick to this time box environment. So these are the 3 backlogs which are essentially used in your agile environment. First, the master backlog is your product backlog. Then comes your release sprint backlog, and your release backlog spans across multiple sprint cycles. Now that could be 2 sprints, 3 sprints, 4 sprints. That depends on your project manager's, your product owner's consideration. What the actual time frame he needs to fix on it. Okay, any questions, anyone so far? Now comes the interesting part, that is Scrum story points. Now, what are story points? So essentially, this is a Fibonacci series that we assign to a particular user story or a particular feature in an agile environment, wherein depending on the size and complexity of the story, we determine its story point. But size or complexity is not the only part which is taken into the consideration when determining the story points. So story point starts with Fibonacci series 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, or 20. Now, not a single person should be able to decide the story point. Okay, when I say not the single person, for example, if there are the product owner is the guiding force in agile environment, so he shouldn't be only accountable for defining the story point. So for example, we have this story point 1, 3, 5, 8, 13, and 20. So again, we would be using ranking for this particular story point, the ranking technique that we used, but it is used in a different context. How it is used, let me show you. So let's say I assign story point like this. Now what happens? Let's say there is feature 1, then there is feature 0, and then there is feature 0. Okay, and let's say these 3 features are part of your sprint release. Okay, now in this sprint release we have 3 developers who would be essentially developing these features. So let's say we have developer A, then we have developer B, and then we have developer C. Now next, for feature we have developer A, B and C, same developer. For other feature we have developer A, B and C. Now what happens in this particular sprint planning meeting is like, we ask the developer. So essentially if you consider okay, so this particular term is called as planning poker, wherein we give this story point card to them. Okay, so we first discuss with the entire team. The product owner explains the feature 1 to the entire development team. So Scrum Master is also available in that particular meeting. So the product owner explains feature 1 to these 3 developers, and Scrum Master keeps a watch on them. Now developer A says that in order to develop this particular feature, I would be taking 4 hours. So essentially the story point for 4 hours is 1. Now developer B says I would be developing this feature in 1 day. So the story point for 1 day is 2 hours. Okay. Now developer C says that I would be developing this feature in 2 days. So the story point for this particular feature is 3 3. Now what essentially the Scrum Master would do, the Scrum Master would go to developer A and he would ask him to justify that why you gave your estimation so less. Justify it. So developer A may be an experienced developer. He may be having more technical expertise than developer B and C. So he would explain and convince the Scrum Master if this story is picked by him or this feature is picked by him, he should be able to deliver this particular feature within 4 hours and there won't be any delay. So Scrum Master would go to developer B and C and ask their agreement on them. So after everyone's agreement, they would say, okay, the developer A estimation is accurate, and they would assign a story point 1 to that particular story and it would be assigned to developer A. Now this is scenario 1. Now there could be a scenario 2 wherein for the second feature, developer A gives an estimate of 1 day, which is 2. Developer B gives an estimate of 1 day, which is 2 story point, and developer C gives an estimate of 2 days, which is 3 story point. Now here what it is happening, the team is having a view which is in majority. For example, developer A and B says it can be done in 2 days and developer C says it can be done in 3 days. So the Scrum Master would go to developer C and ask why you have given increased time frame for it. So there could be his theory behind it. He may be new to that particular project or he may not have worked in that particular environment. There could be any situation. So the Scrum Master would ask developer A and B that should we allow developer C to work on his skill set. So if A and B agrees that this particular developer should be doing it in order to understand that particular user story, they would allow developer C to do that particular feature too. But since the majority of the developer in that particular project agreed this feature to be 2, the story point would be 2, and they would give the necessary help and support to that particular developer in terms of building that particular feature. Now there could be scenario 3 wherein the story point is like day 1, 2, or 1 day 2, or 1 day 2. So in this case, we are fine with the story point. We understood that the story point is 2 and it would take maximum 1 day, and everyone is clear on this particular um, uh, duration of completion of this particular user story or feature. Now the big question is, who would pick up this particular user story? Developer A, B, or C? Any views? Anyone in this case?
Yes, depend on the majority
As in,
developer depending on
okay, any other views? Okay, so what happens? Remember when we covered the principles of Agile, I spoke about team has to be self-organizing. Okay, so what happened in this case? The Scrum Master would leave the decision on any one of these developer. So they would plan out the other items first, and then they would say, depending on whoever completes their work, which is there on their plate, after that, whoever is free, they should start picking up this particular user story. So they have to first complete their other items or other items that are pending on their plate, and then they could go about picking up this particular user story. So he need to ensure that there are no conflicts around it, because there may be a case this user stories implementation would be very simple in nature. So we as human who doesn't like to pick simpler items first. So there may be a conflict, but it's Scrum Master's responsibility to avoid those conflicts. So he would leave the decision upon the developers that whatever is there on your plate, first finish that, and whoever gets freed from that particular items which are already there on your plate can go about picking this particular user story. So there is no hard and fast theory around it in this particular scenario. It's more of a self-organizing thing which Agile advocates. So this is about your planning poker, how you would plan about your size and estimation of your user story, and how you would assign the story points to a particular user story or features. Next comes your burn down chart. Now, as a product owner, he would like to know the progress of the team. Like, what is the team doing? I mean, today we have started a sprint, and he would start on uh, looking at the burn down chart. How much work has actually been completed by the development and the other team members. So for that reason, he would always refer to the burn down chart, wherein he would get a clear understanding on what's the current progress of that particular um, sprint. So let's say there are um, uh, 9 items in this particular sprint. So after every day, this chart should go down. It shouldn't be flat. It shouldn't be in incremental nature. It should always keep burning on this direction. So if everything burns on this particular direction, that means everything is done. Now, towards the end of the sprint cycle, there would be a situation wherein you would be having some work done. If, some work undone. So if there are any undone work items, it would move again back to the product backlog, and in during the next sprint planning session, it would be replanned accordingly, uh, as you are doing the planning from scratch again. So whatever would be left towards the end would be again moved back to your product backlog. So here this particular graph shows you the story points that we just discussed, story point of every feature or every user stories. Now once you complete a particular user story or complete a particular feature, the total number of the story points would get reduced by that many number of features associated to that particular user story or feature. It could be 10 points, it could be 3 points, it could be 5 points. It would keep on subtracting from this cumulative score of the entire items in that particular sprint cycle. Then there is work done during that particular iteration, then work remaining, and total this particular graph would give you the actual work done so far. So this is how the product owner would see the progress of the team with the help of burn down chart. Now this burn down chart is not only applicable to the developer, it is applicable to the business analyst and QA team as well. Only difference would be that you see over here, instead of development task, BAs would be having their analysis task and QA would be having their QA task. That would be the only difference. Else every Scrum team member would be having such burn down chart, and at high level every Scrum team would be having this particular burn down chart. So it can be visualized from an individual member in a team perspective and can also be visualized from an entire team as a whole perspective as well, from the entire Scrum team, which includes your developers, BAs and QAs. Now then there is something called as sprint velocity. Now what is sprint velocity? Now every sprint has a certain velocity associated to it. For example, let's say we developed a particular sprint of 65 user story, 75 user story and 100 user story. We have 3 sprints which are having feature worth of 65 points, 75 points and 100 story points. Then what should be the velocity? So their velocity would be accumulation of or addition of 65 plus 75 plus 100 divided by total number of sprints. Let's say after second sprint you need to calculate the velocity. So it would be 65 plus 75 divided by 2. After 3 sprints you need to calculate the velocity, that is 65 plus 75 plus 100 divided by 3, that is 80 story points. So why we need to calculate velocity? We need to calculate velocity after every sprint cycle in order to understand whether a constant pace is available or not. Remember we discussed a principle in Agile, we need to maintain a constant pace. So that particular constant pace can only be calculated with the help of your sprint velocity, wherein you accumulate all the user story points divided by the number of sprints, that is 4th sprint, 5th sprint or 6th sprint, and you see whether it is this particular figure, is it consistent or not after every sprint release. So this would give us the velocity and would ensure that we achieve a constant pace. Because why we introduce this concept story points in Agile, the reason being is you cannot calculate the velocity only basis on the number of items completed. So the important aspects in Agile is to deliver a value to the customer. So in order to assess the value, we first mapped each item as per their story point, and then we started calculating the velocity. So it's not the number of items you complete, it's the value, the average of the value that you deliver to the customer. Value as in this 65 accumulation can have 10 user story or feature. On the contrary, this 75 story point can have only 2 user story or feature, but the value is different. So this 10 user story or 10 feature having very less value than this 2 user story or feature. So we are essentially calculating the value, not the number of items completed in that Agile. Then comes your capacity planning. Like I said, sprint are fixed, their duration is fixed, but if we need additional work to be done in a particular release or in a particular sprint, then we always have the flexibility that is called as capacity planning, wherein we can increase the number of team members in the Scrum team or decrease the number of team members in that particular Scrum team. So this particular part is called as capacity planning, wherein depending on the demand, we add or subtract team members from the team, the Scrum team. So this is an example of your capacity planning. So let's consider we have a 1 week period with 5 working days. So that is around 32 hours, considering 8 hours as a standard working day for a particular day. Now next we have the team members availability, like how much time that particular team member is available out of that particular 8 hours. So these are the team members, these are their availability, and this is their actual hours. So at the end we come to the capacity planning this way. So out of 24 hours he is available for 75%. Out of 8 hours he is available for only 50% of time, and to the end we get total team members time. So this is how you do your capacity planning. So if you are familiar with a tool called as Jira or Team Foundation Server, so they have all the necessary algorithm and workflow that drives this capacity planning, velocity calculation, and your burn down chart, what I would say, reporting statistic. You just enter the information over there and it would give you the results. So you need not to calculate it manually. The system would do it automatically for you. Now there is something called as definition of done. There are two things in Agile. One is your acceptance criteria and one is called as definition of done. So essentially, business analyst would always write the acceptance criteria and attach it to the user story. Okay, the user stories are nothing but your requirement. Now, after the requirement has been implemented by the developer, they would mark the requirement as done. So that is called as your definition of done, and it is usually given by your developer. Then what the BA would do? BA would always keep the acceptance criteria. So this is a very favorite interview question. They may ask you what's the difference between acceptance criteria and definition of done. You can say acceptance criteria would always come from a business analyst side, and it would be written after the story has been written alongside the story and handed over to the development team. And the development team, after they have completed all the activity, all the necessary sanitation check around that particular user story or requirement, they would define the user story as done or the user story is complete. Now then there is something called as sprint zero. So essentially, sprint doesn't start with number 1. Sprint starts from 0. So the digit is 0. So what happens in sprint 0? In sprint 0, we don't create a project altogether. Instead, what we do, we set up the project, we agree on the discussion, we schedule the meetings, we do the all necessary environmental setup. So whatever pre-project activities are there, that is something we take it up in sprint 0. Now the question here is it adding value to the customer? Like we all agree now that whatever you are delivering during a sprint release, it should add some value to the customer. So the answer is yes, absolutely it is adding value to the customer, because it gives us the necessary infrastructure and the necessary setup to start our development work. So definitely it adds value. So every project would be having sprint 0. Maybe it's not discussed openly. It is something that is with the senior developers in the Scrum team and your product owner. But yes, your sprint always starts from sprint 0. It never starts from sprint 1. And towards the end, these are all your Scrum values: courage, commitment, openness, focus, respect, whatever the soft skills that you need in order to work in a Scrum environment. Okay, any questions, anyone so far? I mean, are you able to understand what I explained so far in this 1.5 hour?
Yes, Sunil.
Okay. So let's go for a. Now we will examine one more framework, that is XP, Extreme Programming. Pretty much more or less it's same the Scrum framework. Let us see what's there in this.
Hey, Sunil, sorry to interrupt. Just 2 minutes. We are
Mhm.
outside. We'll go back inside. Just give us 2 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, 2 minutes.
So in extreme programming, it's pretty much the same thing, same iteration we follow, um, same increment we follow, but this particular framework is more focused towards the development needs. As in, uh, this particular framework is more developer friendly framework, unlike your Scrum framework. So in Scrum framework, we had room for everyone, the business analyst, the product owner, the Scrum master, and the development QA, everyone. But this particular framework is more, um, what I would say, a developer friendly framework. So things are pretty much same, but they are custom tailored to meet the development team's need. For example, we would first do a release planning over here, and it may take months to plan a release. Then we do the iteration plan, that is your sprint plan. It would take the time frame in and around the some weeks. Then we have the acceptance test cases, which are written during your creation of the user stories by the business analyst, and it would take essentially some days. And then, as usual, we have the daily stand-up meeting, which essentially takes 1 day. Now, from here onwards is something that is relevant to your developer. So here, the development team, what they do a pair negotiation. Now, what is pair negotiation? So essentially, what we learned so far in Scrum framework, we saw that every developer was self-engaging. They were self-motivated. They were self-empowered to do their own thing. But here we work in pairs. We establish a pair of developer. So out of those pair, one would be the driver developer and one would be the actual coder. Now, what is the responsibility of the driver developer? What he would do, he would observe the other developer who is actually writing the code. He would review every line of code he is writing in his development. So he would be kind of guiding force to the other pair of developer. Now same thing, let's say we have developer 1 and developer 2 in a particular pair. So whatever feature developer 1 has picked, that would be reviewed by developer 2 for the completeness of the code, ensurance the necessary coding standards are maintained. And whatever developer 2 has picked, that would be reviewed by developer 1. So essentially they work in pairs. That's the reason they are called as pair programming. It is also sometimes called as pair programming, extreme programming. So they do a pair negotiation within hours, like who would be doing what and who would be reviewing whose work. Then they would be doing the unit testing. Now unit testing is like automated code with a necessary set of test data to test whatever functionality they have written that meets the business expectation or not. And then they would do their pair programming, the actual um, programming work which they have uh, coded so far, and then it would be delivered to that particular environment. So this loop keeps on incrementing release after release. Only differentiation here is that the developer would work in pair. One would be the driver, one would be the coder to each other around the functionalities they have picked up. And more emphasis is given on the development part, the unit testing, the programming, and the coding. Next, if we try to understand why it is called as extreme, because before starting the programming, we write the unit test cases so that we avoid the unnecessary coding issues that are supposed to happen in that particular software framework. Then we start with simple things first and then we move to the complex part. So that's also one of the reasons why it is called as extreme or pair programming. Then after we have developed, after we have established pairs of developer, after we have ensured that both the developers has tested and coded each other's work, we would integrate that particular code with our actual system. to see whether it is working as a system as a whole or not, whatever new addition they have put in that particular system. And then we would give the same review to the customer, gather their feedback and so on, and then we would be doing a retrospective. So rest all processes are same, but only difference here is we put more emphasis on the coding part. So if you see, we have the planning, we have the same story card, then we have the design, we take the first simplest item first, then we code, then we test and deliver it to the customer, depending on whatever acceptance criteria are mentioned. But if you see, there are certain blocks over here like pair programming, then unit testing and continuous integration, and refactoring. These are the three things which are only exclusive to the development team. Like I said, the driver and coder, each other would review each other's work in terms of ensuring the highest level of quality standards are maintained. They would do refactoring of their particular code. So refactoring is like you are having a particular piece of code in a particular system. Now it is working fine, but as a developer you see that that code would be more optimized. For example, you write 10 line of code. Now a developer realizes that the same thing can be achieved with 5 lines of code. That would save the compiler time. So what they would do, they would refactor the code. The functionality would remain same, but the standards would be increased, or I would say the standard would be much more mature by reducing 10 lines of code to 5 lines. Similarly, unit testing and continuous integration. So there would be a main environment wherein your entire system would be there, and whatever chunks of code they develop, they integrate to the main system and check whether the code is working or not. So these are the three essential things which essentially triggers to the word extreme. So that is the reason why they are called as extreme. Now, if there are necessary feedbacks by the customer, then they would be again taken up in the planning phase, then design, then coding, then testing, and then a product increment. That is your release, your sprint deliverable. Now, like we saw, we have code reviews done over here, we have testing, we have design, we have integration testing, and we have short iteration, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 weeks, or 4 weeks of that duration. So effective practice would give extreme programming practices. Code reviews would give the pair programming. Testing would give the unit testing and continuous regression. Design is your persistent refactoring, and simplicity is simple design, simple code, and code that is not required. And short iteration is the planning game, like how soon can we deliver that particular functionality. So this testing is unit testing. Now unit testing is something your developer does, not the QA people. So don't get confused this testing with the quality assurance testing. This is not that testing. After they have adhere to all this process, then the system or the functionalities would go to the QA people who would test it out. Now these are some of the extreme programming values, same as we saw in Scrum: courage, feedback, simplicity, communication, respect. Then there are some extreme programming principles like do the simplest item first, baby steps, flow with the flow, then reflection, improvement, mutual benefits, failure. You have to accept failure as a team or as a pair, not as what I would say specific or blame to a particular person. So these are some of the XP principles. So we have the same thing: rapid feedback, assume simplicity, incremental change, embracing change, and quality work. And the values is communication, simplicity, feedback, courage, and respect. Typical agile framework values and principles. So these are the phases in extreme programming. We have the coding phase, we have the testing phase, then we listen to the customer around feedback, and then we go about the further design. So these are the 4 phases in extreme programming. Now these are some of the 12 common practices for extreme programming, like the planning game, then short releases, domain elements. If there are any domain specific ingredients in that particular software, like insurance business rules or finance business rule, then that has to be clarified with the business analyst. Then simple design. Now design here doesn't mean the UI screen or mockup. Design here means the architectural design of the system. Testing again means the unit testing, not the testing the QA people do. Refactoring, as I told you, improving the code. Then pair programming, like the driver and coder. Collective ownership, like I said, if system fails, it's both the driver and coder's responsibility, not a individual person's responsibility. So it's a collective ownership. Continuous integration is like whatever you have developed, you would integrate it continuously on a particular ongoing system, and then you would pass it on to the other QA people. And 40 hours per week, like I said, it would be short release, so it's better to have a 40-hour week cycle in extreme programming cases, not in Scrum. Scrum's ideal time is 2 to 4 weeks. Here the ideal time is 40 hours per week. So if you see the frameworks closely, in Waterfall, we used to deliver the software in years. In Agile Scrum, we used to deliver software in weeks. And here we could say we used to deliver software in hours. So see the time difference, how this framework has evolved till now. And then we have the customer and the coding standard, whatever they are reviewing. Now, what the business people would do and what the technical people will do in extreme programming model. So business people would give the scope, they would set the priority, and they would define what all features they need in a release, and they would decide the release date. Whereas technical people would estimate, they would see the challenges, they would follow a process of the the extreme programming, and they would give a detailed scheduling. So the process is that 4 blocks which we saw: coding, testing, listening, design. So this is how the category of people are defined in extreme programming. Now, what are the roles in extreme programming? Like in Scrum, we saw Scrum Master, Product Owner, and Scrum Team. So in extreme programming, you would be having developer, also referred to as programmer. We have the customer, we have the manager, also called as tracker, and we have the coach. So coach here is Scrum Master. Manager is an additional role who would see all the things, and customer can play as your business analyst who would give the requirements, and developer are the team who would be doing all the development activities. Now, if there are any tester, they would be part of this particular team, developer. There is no explicit QA role in extreme programming. Now, these are the artifacts that we create in extreme programming. We would be creating user stories, we would be writing acceptance test cases, we would be doing estimates, we would be doing the release planning, iteration planning, task cards, design, unit test cases, and customer and development communication records. So these are the artifacts or the deliverables that you produce during extreme programming, unlike your Scrum. So in Scrum, we have some more additions to it. Now, since that has more time to deliver, around between 2 to 4 weeks, the artifacts are more. Since here the time frame is limited to only 40 hours per week, so the artifacts are comparatively less over here. Okay, any questions in extreme programming, anyone? Okay, now let's quickly see what is there in DevOps environment.
Sunil, I have a question in extreme framework, extreme programming. I'm just wondering, like, when we discuss the phases in extreme programming, like, why does the designing phase come in the end? Usually, all the designing phase in all other frameworks is in the beginning itself.
So designing is architecture design. It's not the business analyst design. It's the software architecture design. Okay, now moving to the DevOps framework. So DevOps is a framework which is mainly executed between the developers, testers, and directly the IT operations. So this framework is more prominent and more popular in the operations project, wherein we have a tester, a developer, and directly the IT operations team. Unlike the other two frameworks, wherein we have the entire product development in scope, here operation is given more emphasis. That's the reason it is called as DevOps, developer and operation. OPS for operation, DE for developers. Now what happens in this DevOps phase is like, first we see its principle. So this is customer centric action. So when we are dealing with an operation team, so we are essentially dealing with the end customer. So the actual product has been developed and we are only supporting its operation. So that's the reason why it is called as customer centric action. Then we have the end-to-end responsibility of solving their queries on daily basis, because when you are working as a developer and quality engineer for a production support team, so this is mainly used in production support team, not in every cases. You are essentially directly interacting with the customer or the IT operations team. So what they would do, they would give you their day-to-day issues to resolve you. For example, let's say you are issuing a insurance policy. Now, insurance policy is having incorrect data in one of the particular field. For example, the insurance transaction field. I mean, while purchasing the policy, the transaction field. So what you would do, you would correct the necessary data elements in it. For example, the credit card has been processed. Only thing is that in that particular credit card form, the credit card number is not coming up. So what you would do, you would essentially do a data fix. That is one scenario. Second scenario could be your policy coverage has been taken, but it is not reflecting in the actual policy document. For example, in the case of auto insurance, you took a medical liability coverage and that is not coming in that particular policy. So what your team would do or the developer would do, he would do a data fix. So these kind of data fix activity or small changes are directly taken care in the production environment itself. And who takes care of it? The developers and the QA, who is responsible for supporting that production environment or operation team. So these are not hardcore programming, feature gathering or feature development, but in most of the cases, it is simple data fixes, which they do. Now, on a daily basis, there would be around 20 to 25 production log, or maybe 100 to 150 production log, depending on the what I would say, nature of the business the customer does. If the business is too big, for example, if you consider Travelers Insurance or Allstate Insurance, these are huge entities, and their production data is too large compared to the other mid-tier insurance player. So they would be logging around 200, 300 defects, mainly categorized as data fix in nature. So you have to solve as a developer what is their regular request. So that is the reason why BAs are not that much involved in this particular framework. Until and unless it's a huge change in requirement, BAs would be involved. Else, the developer would directly work with the IT operations team. So here also the focus is continuous improvement, automate everything. Here automation is put more emphasis because if you consider the Scrum environment and the extreme programming environment, we have an official deployment process wherein all your work would be collected together, and after 1 week or 2 week or 3 week or 4 week would be promoted to a particular production environment. But here we are working directly in production environment. So where do we promote the code? So there is no need of promoting a particular code. So we directly fix in the prod environment itself, and we just need to rebuild that particular application. Now that rebuilding is something that could be automated. So that's the reason why they are saying is automate everything, because there is no environment to promote the code. You are directly coding in the production environment. So there is no need of deployment. You are just rebuilding or recompiling that application. Then comes work as one team. So there would be 3-4 developers in that particular team who would be working in that particular DevOps project, and monitor and test everything. So whatever you are developing, you have to monitor and test. Now there may be a case that you may not be given any dedicated quality assurance guy to you. So in that case, you as a developer has to test it out everything, because a simple data fix doesn't need that much effort in terms of testing. Now, these are the significance of DevOps. Predictability. We know what are the issues, what are the failure reason. We can reproduce the issue. We can maintain it. The time to market is up to 50% through streamlined software delivery. We get a better time to market. The quality is greater. We have reduced risk. Resiliency is there. Cost efficiency is there, and breaks larger code base into smaller pieces. Like I said, we need not to develop a functionality over here, rather we focus on data fixes. So that's the reason why it do not have to go through that entire scrum process or extreme programming process. It can be done standalone itself. It need not need a process. Now, when to use DevOps and when not to use DevOps. Now, when the application is very large in nature, in that context, you would be using DevOps. For example, e-commerce site or application hosted on a cloud platform. Only then you would be using DevOps. And when not to use DevOps, like mission critical application for a banking system, power and other sensitive data sites. So wherein strict access control on the production environment is needed, you would not use DevOps model. So this model is essentially focused for an environment wherein you have large scale data in usage for your day-to-day transaction, or the what I would say, the environment is a production environment, directly production environment, no other environment. So here code need not to be deployed. You code in the production environment itself, and that deployment concept is not available in DevOps environment here. Now, these are the typical phases in DevOps. We start with developing, then testing, integrating, and if needed, deploying, and then monitoring. So deployment here doesn't mean the environment deployment. This is more of a scheduling. Scheduling as in every 2 hours, the scheduler would run, and whatever changes you have made to the system, it would auto-commit it and recompile the system. So here deployment doesn't mean deploying from one environment to other. Here it means scheduling it for them to be executed after next 2 hours or 3 hours once you are done with your coding. So this is how it looks like: development, testing, integration, deployment, and monitoring. Now let us connect all the pieces that we learned from our past session and today's session. We had traditional framework, which we covered in our last session, agile and DevOps. Now in traditional communication, if you framework, if you see the stakeholder and communication chain in a particular environment. So we had a customer and software requirement, we have a developer and tester, we have operations and IT. So they both interacted with each other, like customer and software requirement was communicated to the developer and tester, whereas if there are any maintenance queries, it was communicated to developer and tester, and if there are any feedback needed, they reached out to the operation team, IT infrastructure, and customer or the software requirement via a business analyst. This is how your traditional framework look like. Now if we consider the agile framework, okay, so what they saw in traditional framework, when the developer and tester they interacted directly with the customer and software requirement, there were some gaps in place. So that gap was bridged by the agile framework with the help of a business analyst or any XYZ person. So here was the gap. Now if we consider the DevOps framework, now there was still some gap between the operations and IT infrastructure team, which was bridged by your DevOps team. So essentially in agile we mitigated the gap between the customer and developer, whereas in DevOps we mitigated the gap between the developer and the operation team. So the customer is a different thing who gives the actual requirement, the software requirement, and operation people are the different team who gives their requirement on a daily basis depending on how they are using the system. So this is how your framework deliver value from traditional till agile till DevOps. Now to summarize, whenever you are having a large scale project to develop and the requirements are not yet developed, you would always go with agile framework. And when the system is already developed and you just need to support the operations people, then you would go with DevOps framework. So that's the difference. Okay. Before that, any questions, anyone? Okay. Now there is something called as iron triangle in SDLC. Now what is iron triangle? If you consider this particular triangle, this triangle has three elements to it associated with the quality of the particular software. So the first parameter is scope, then comes your time, and then comes your resource. So essentially these are the three parameters which drives the quality of your software. Without these three parameters, you cannot start your project. The scope is how much to build and what are the in-scope item and what are the out-of-scope item. Resources is like how many people you would need to build that particular software. A time is what's the duration of completion of that particular project, 1 year, 6 months, and so on. Now together these three, they would define the quality of your system. Okay. Now in and around this iron triangle, we had two approaches. One is your traditional approach, waterfall model, and one is your agile approach, that is your advanced framework. Now what's impact it has on the iron triangle, which is the base for any project management or for any project. So if you consider the traditional approach or the waterfall approach, here the scope is fixed. We know what are the in-scope item and what are the out-of-scope item. Whereas the resource and time are estimable. They can, change depending on the project scope. So scope is fixed, but resource and time are not fixed. The quality is fixed on all the three cases, but in traditional approach, the scope is fixed. Now moving on to the agile framework, here resources and time are fixed, but scope is not fixed. Why scope is not fixed? Any idea? And why here scope is fixed?
Because in agile, that's the no. Because in waterfall, what they follow is it's very documented procedure, and we know that what is required to be done from the beginning itself. So that's why scope is fixed over there.
Absolutely. Perfect. So in waterfall, since we have a well-documented system, we know why the scope is fixed. And in agile, as the requirement keeps on evolving iteration after iteration, the scope is not fixed. Whereas we ensure the resources and time are fixed. So this impact it has on your iron triangle of project management. So to summarize, today we covered SDLC's advanced method, Agile Scrum framework, Extreme Programming framework, and DevOps framework. So the next session we would be starting with the business case, and then we would actually start doing the requirement gathering sessions in both approaches, the traditional approach and agile approach. So what we covered today is just I would say 25% of agile. In our agile approach session, we would actually see what are epics, what are user stories, what are features, what are capabilities, how to write acceptance criteria, what's the format for epic, how to write user stories, how to categorize user stories, how to split user stories, and how to create a link between them. So all these things we would learn in this particular session. And in traditional approach, we would see the different categories of requirement. For example, what are user specific requirement, what are customer requirement, what are business requirement, what are functional requirement, non-functional requirement. So there are essentially 8 to 10 categories of requirement, and with some example and case studies, we would try to understand it.